Good morning, everyone. I'm Conan Smith. I am the president and MEC at President and CEO at the Michigan Environmental Council. Welcome back to Capital Connection. We're going to be talking today about coastal dunes, their past, their present, and their future. And we've got a lot of information to share with you. We're going to look at some of the changes that have happened to Michigan's dune ecosystem over decades, a project that MEC conducted with a couple of fine researchers from Michigan State University who are joining us today. And we're going to talk about how we conceptualize that dune ecology and advance better public policy to protect it. We have some really wonderful guests today. A familiar face for most of you, Tom Zimnicki, who worked at the Michigan Environmental Council for 6 years, Tom, is that right? 7 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Tom ran all of our agriculture programs for a while, and he is now with our member organization, the Alliance for the Great Lakes, doing similar work at the regional scale. So instead of just like our little lakes in Michigan, Tom, you gotta deal with those crazy people in Chicago and Ohio and Indiana now, right?
That's right.
Well, congratulations on that position. It's really, really nice to have you back here as well.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Thanks, Conan.
So we've also got professors Alan Arbogast and Robert Richardson from Michigan State University. Alan, Rob, tell us a little bit about how you guys got into this research around dune ecology. You come with very different perspectives, different lenses on it, right? One from geography and one from community sustainability. Alan, why don't we kick off with you? What brought you to this particular work?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always fun to talk about sand dunes, and I've enjoyed my collaboration with MEC, Tom, and Robbie. Gosh, over what, 5 or 6 years now at this point. We've done some really cool things together. I'm a geomorphologist. I study landforms and how they evolve. And for my dissertation research back in the day, early 90s, I worked on dune fields in the Great Plains. Trying to understand their evolution and how they responded to climate change and things like that in the past. And when I was lucky enough to nab this job, we live in the middle of just a gorgeous dune landscape here, and it was just natural for me to start looking at some of the questions associated with them. Again, it was lucky because although they had been a source of interest for a long time to a lot of different people, some really rigorous geologic work had never been done on them, and including dating and things like that. So it was a good opportunity for me, and it's been fun.
And it's the largest freshwater dune system in the world, right? So a unique place to do this kind of research.
Yeah, it is. And one of the things that's always struck me is how our dunes are world class. I mean, you go to Australia, New Zealand, the UK, any place like that, France. And our dunes rival those, any way you want to look at it.
And Robbie, these really beautiful, iconic pieces of geography are often under threat. We've seen them change over the years from a lot of our human development activities. You're bringing that community sustainability lens to this work. What made you attracted to coastal communities and dunes?
Yeah, thanks, Conan. It's a pleasure to be here. And unlike my colleague Al, who's really worked on research on the physical landscape of dunes for a very long time, my training is in environmental economics. And so my background is largely in using surveys to understand the perceptions of individuals, mostly on public lands. I've been a big fan of public lands for much of my career. And use tools from economics and, like I said, visitor surveys to understand how people understand and use landscapes. I love the dunes. I love visiting the dunes. And so when I first learned about the opportunity to become involved in this kind of work with MEC, it was really exciting. I've learned a lot about the physical landscape from Al, but through the work that we've done, we've also learned a lot about how stakeholders and citizens value these wonderful places.
And the interface of the citizenry with these places is changed and morphed over the years. We've had varying degrees of government oversight and protection over decades. Tom, can you talk a little bit about how in the last 10 years, we've seen a different kind of approach? Under Governor Snyder, the legislature passed and he signed into law an amendment to the Critical Dunes Act that gave a lot more of the oversight responsibility to local governments. And that's had consequences on our management approach. Some would say both positive and negative. What's your lens on how that's changed?
So, the revisions in 2012 to Section 353 really amounted to changes on how we manage and also kind of the activities that require or don't require permits within dune systems. I think to your point, to your question, Conan, it's striking when you look at the number of acres of dunes across the state. And so it's right around 230,000 acres of dunes, and just over half of those are publicly controlled, publicly owned. So either the state, locals, feds, and then the rest is through private entities, through private homeowners. And so you have like these three different layers of management. So you have at the state level, looking especially at like the Critical Dunes program and what is permitted. You also then have dunes that are in local control that are then obviously that is kind of up to that local unit of government. So what we see is kind of varying degrees of skill sets, frankly, in some of those communities of like being able to develop plans and management programs for those ecosystems. And as Al and Robbie are going to get into, those systems are highly dynamic in terms of how they change over time. And so to have different standards at different levels of government obviously can lead to some pushback from local residents. It can lead to questioning, like a questionable efficacy of are we managing the dunes appropriately?
Alan, that change is really what prompted the collaboration between you and MEC. We saw with the new law a need to resource these local communities who were having increased levels of responsibility, but also recognize that we don't really have a sense of the environment that we were talking about. And you and our former MEC alum, Brad Garman, took on a project to start doing some cataloging there. And then 3 years later, you've got a comprehensive GIS map of the dunes that you were able to put out in the world.
Yeah, that was a whole lot of fun, and it was great working with Brad. We always joked that here you had a couple of Kansas guys. Brad's from Kansas, Western Kansas. I'm from Eastern Kansas.
I didn't know that. That's
yeah,
great.
Right. And that we were up here looking at Great Lakes, which is like a zillion times more water than we'd ever seen before, And so it was a lot of fun. Our basic idea was to there'd been a lot of work that had been done since the late 90s on the geomorphology of the dune systems, and the Sand Dune Protection Management Act and much of the early statutes about that really didn't take into account what we really know about their evolution, and including their geography. What's their real geography? What drives them? How do they form? We certainly reconstructed that there were periods of time in the past that they were really stable, not moving much. And then there were other times where they were moving around quite a lot. So our goal was to bring the latest science to bear on coastal dune management. And the slide that you're showing right now is an example of what we wanted to do. There had been some early mapping efforts. It was going back to the 60s to understand the geography of Michigan's coastal dunes, but the methodologies were pretty crude because we didn't have high resolution digital technology to bring to bear. What you're looking at here, especially on the left-hand side, is a high resolution LiDAR image It's a radar image from an airplane, and you can see the spatial extent of dunes and their individual forms very clearly. And so we were able to do that across all coasts, not just Lake Michigan, and identified that there are about 230,000 acres of sand dunes coastal sand dunes in the state. Interestingly, the critical dunes are what people think about the most, for obvious reasons, and there's about 74,000 acres of those.
Wow.
In many cases, some of the critical dunes maps, from my perspective, don't make a whole lot of sense, and so we were trying to kind of bring everything up to date that way, and I think it worked out really, really well.
Once we had this map of where the dunes were currently, you all wanted to start visualizing how they have changed and morphed over time, and then started in 2018. I think, Tom, you were part of this project too, right? Like visualizing the near-term history through repeat photography. Will you guys talk a little bit about what that process was like?
Yeah, I mean, well, Al, this is your thing. You roll with it.
Okay, Tom. Yeah, this was something that I'd always wanted to do. Everyone who hangs out on the dunes knows that they can change quite a lot from year to year. And we, for the first 20, 25 years of research on these things, we were reconstructing their past, how they've evolved over the past 5,000 years. And we feel like we have a very good handle on that. But how have they changed in the historic record or the post-settlement, if you will? That terminology is sort of under debate about how you define that these days. But so Kevin McKeon, a very good student of mine, he's my PhD student. We started talking about doing repeat photography. It was something that Tom and I had been talking about, and it worked out really, really well. So the idea was to find old photographs that had been taken by others in the archives, and then go back and to the same place and reshoot the photograph now, and to see how things had changed. And on the left-hand side, for example, is a photograph from Grand Beach in the southwestern part of the coast from 1987. And the same location on the right-hand side, and you can see that it's changed dramatically. If you want to pop up the next one. Yeah, this is, and one thing you learn is like, whoa, man, people wore crazy things to the beach. A long time ago. We have one great shot from the teens, about 100 years ago, and women in great big hats and guys in suits, hanging out on the beach, which was kind of fun to look at. But it was a challenge. It was fun to find the same place and kind of move around and go, yeah, this is it. Nope, that's not it. And then actually take the shot. And one of the things that we noticed is that in all the photographs, the amount of vegetation had increased dramatically. You can kind of get a sense of that. Here, the forest in the background, bare sand over on the left-hand side of the image in the background, and now that's all forested. Another image coming up will show the same thing. Sorry to drive this here. This is at Sleeping Bear, 1917 and 2019, and you can see, I mean, it was fascinating because these old photographs showed bare sand all over the place. We even went back to the original land survey back in the 1830s, and there was lots of discussion from the surveyors about bare sand, sort of desert environments, and that's really changed in the last 150, 200 years almost, which is really interesting. I think we have another one. Yep, this is North Manitou Island. So this is a place that wouldn't be impacted much by people. And you can see that the amount of vegetation between 1905 and 2019 has expanded dramatically. And what that means as far as the dune system is concerned is that the dunes are stabilizing. And they're in a pattern right now where they're being locked more and more in place. And over time, if this were to continue, then your potential for sand moving around and active dunes and things like that is going to be lessened.
Alan, do you have any sense of what's contributing to the increased vegetation on the dunes? Is it related to climate change? Are these natural cycles?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's one of those things. It's kind of like looking for a needle in the haystack. Um, the only trend that we see that seems to be related to it is in the last 30 years, 35 years, there's been and a slowly increasing amount of precipitation. Okay. And that is something that's modeled in climate change scenarios because warmer air, more moisture, that kind of thing. And if that's true, then we can expect that to continue if indeed the precip pattern is the cause and continues into the future.
Any impact from invasive species moving in?
That seems, these repeat photos was pretty coarse, but in that regard, but we haven't seen a lot of that. Most of they're locally people plant things sometimes that don't really fit, but the fact that this is a pattern that we've seen at some 70 sites up and down the lakeshore would imply that it's a quote natural thing, mostly.
Do you know, are there sort of native dune species that were adapted to how the dunes changed over time, and have those species struggled to maintain primacy?
Yeah, sure. There was great work that was done back in the 1950s by a fellow by the name of Jerry Olson at the University of Chicago, who did pioneering work on plant succession. And that there is a primary succession that we can expect in dunes that goes from marram grass all the way to climax forest, northern hardwood forests. And mostly what we're seeing is that there's been an expansion of marram grass, but in some cases there's more and more forest. When forest is present, that really does tend to stabilize these dunes and reduce the amount of sand blowing around. So if we're really trending that direction, we can expect more of that in the future.
Robbie, as this work is going on to understand the nature of the dunes, you are starting to explore in your mind how people experience them. That decision making is not always an empirical process for public policymakers. It's not just about the science; it's about the emotion that attaches to some of these places as well. You launched a project, a statewide survey of how people felt about the dunes, and have started building out maps of people's perceptions. What are you learning about how we as Michiganders relate to the dunes from these two projects?
Well, certainly the first thing I'll say is that people love dunes. I worked closely with MEC alum Brad Garman, who you mentioned before, on the design of an online survey that I think was in 2017, and more than 3,600 people responded to that survey. So there was wide response. It wasn't just Michiganders as well. It was people who love dunes, and many of them come from Chicago and other parts of it in Illinois and Indiana and Ohio to visit these spectacular landscapes. So we launched the survey, like I said, in summer of 2017, called How You Dune, which is the hashtag that we used to promote it on social media. We got tremendous responses to the survey. And I don't know if you want to show the slides that display the results.
Yeah.
We learned, you might say, a little bit of information from a whole lot of people. You may imagine that there's little patience for participating in lengthy online surveys. But we asked people, first of all, the last time you visited a dune area, where did you go? And not surprisingly, the vast majority of our respondents reported having visited Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. It's a tourist attraction. Large numbers of people go there from all over the world every year. But you can see that many other dunes along Lake Michigan get a lot of attraction and appeal according to our opt-in survey. Most of you are familiar with these. And then we also have Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore on the Upper Peninsula. So that gave us some information about the most heavily visited places where people go, where they like to visit. We also asked them, what do you do when you go to what's your primary reason for visiting dunes? And they, not surprisingly, said things like going to the beach or enjoying scenery and camping. So this, as I said, if you want to go on to the next slide, this gave us some information about what people do. The most, I think, important outcome of that online survey was how people feel. So we asked them to rate from extremely important to not important at all, a range of cultural values. And I realize this is a really busy slide, but I just want to point out scenic beauty. Over 96% of respondents said that scenic beauty is either extremely important or very important to them for visiting coastal dunes in Michigan. We had very high numbers. More than 83% said protection of a unique ecosystem. So people are aware that these landscapes are unique, and they're unique in the state of Michigan. And I think one of the most important findings is more than 93% indicated that protection of dunes for future generations is either extremely important or very important. So like I said, this gave us a little bit of information from a whole lot of people. And what we wanted to do then is to drill down deeper into how people perceive dunes and what they perceive as driving change in dunes, which led us to develop another kind of map, not the kind of map that Alan was talking about before, but a tool from social science, which we call mental mapping. And it's a tool that allows individuals to portray literally what they see as the main components of really anything. This is used widely to depict what people think about and feel about a given topic. And everybody has a mental map. We may not be aware of it. They're all unique to us. But if you go to the next slide, you get a sense of what these mental maps look like. And again, I realize this is really small font, but it gives you a sense of what these maps appear. So this is the culmination of all of the 76 or so respondents that participated in the mental mapping workshops. And you can see that there is a great appreciation for scenic beauty and access and the quality of dunes, but some of the negative or darker lines point to development. And this gets back to Conan, your point about earlier. People are concerned that expanding development may affect the quality of dunes, may affect the scenic beauty of dunes, may affect wildlife habitat, which you can see as a slightly smaller circle. So these are some of the things that were on people's minds. They could put anything they wanted. And to that end, you can see all of the elements that people included in their mental map. Some of those, like I mentioned before, scenic beauty, access, and development were mentioned by almost everyone. But people are concerned about things like litter and erosion, protection for wildlife, and many of the other components. So these came straight from them. They were not encouraged or briefed to mention anything. These were all unique to their own individual and unique mental maps. So we learned a lot about how people feel. And yeah, I'll just end by saying that people have great enthusiasm for Michigan's freshwater coastal dunes.
So one of the challenges when you do this mental map, you see deep appreciation for the natural features and their beauty, but there's a disconnect often with how we end up managing those places. Our policymakers maybe aren't embracing the same experience that the visitors to the dunes are having, and they fall under threat. What is the experience and observation of each of you? And maybe Tom, we'll start with you since you're deeply involved in the policy world, about how that disconnect happens and what we can be doing to reestablish a a strong link between the public value of protecting these places and the local and state policies that support those values.
Yeah, I think, you know, as a gross characterization, I think the legislature sometimes views dunes as just kind of this barrier to permitting and barrier to construction of new things. And what's really interesting about Robbie's work is that it helps put like value and like helps assign value, other values to those systems and to those locations. And you know, previous work also looked at like actual economic value and like how much people are spending at the dunes. And so Robbie's work is really critical to help kind of inform the conversation from that end. And then what Al was doing and looking at just like how dynamic these landscapes are on a really short time step, I think played out when we saw with high lake levels just, you know, a couple of years ago, where there was a lot of concern about losing homes and homes falling in. And I think we need to kind of, as a state, kind of collectively recognize that these systems move, that they're like living systems. And so as we're making decisions about what to build, where to build, planning at the local level, it's important to understand that and to develop policies that obviously protect private property and homes, but also recognizes that there are these like inherent risks with developing like on top of a sandbox, right? So
Tom, you mentioned high water. That's been a concern over the last several years. There's a question from one of our viewers who's curious if high water levels have been affecting vegetation and dune stability.
That's probably an Al thing.
Yeah, it's there certainly seems to be some relationship in the past, and by past I mean 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, between lake level fluctuations and dune activation. We don't know precisely what that is because our dating methods have a lot of statistical uncertainty in terms of the amount of time that is encapsulated by any given age. And we can't say that, you know, in July of, you know, 2,500 years ago that this was going on, but certainly higher water level fundamentally would reduce vegetation by increasing the erosion. Okay. That said, there are local variations that occur, and it's pretty obvious that there's no one rule that governs what's happening up and down the lakeshore at any given point, which is a little unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. So, and oftentimes the kinds of things that we see, the changes that might happen with high lake level now won't play out for another 15 or 20 years. And it's hard to predict what that might look like.
Robbie, one of the very human responses has been that lakeshore homeowners wanting to protect the scenic nature of their own property have started to harden the beachfront. And that's not just the scenic nature, they also want to protect their actual homes. But that has deleterious effects on the dune ecosystem as a whole. That is one of those places where we see this disconnect between our protection value and the actions that we're taking. Do you have any thoughts from a community sustainability lens about how we start to bridge that divide between the very personal experience of what's happening on my property and the need for this greater protection of this resource?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, this is really an area where Alan's work and my work sort of overlap, where, you know, we see this evidence that building property, physical property on a dynamic landscape is probably ill-advised because that landscape is constantly changing with literally shifting sands. And so this is where I think, you know, there's a great role for science to inform policy making, like zoning for where housing development is even permitted and allowed. Secondly, communities are very concerned about the integrity of dunes, and they have said this. And so they're users of these dunes, particularly public lands. And you see an outcry from communities. So one of the things I really applaud about MEC is using this opportunity, going back to the online survey, of trying to build a stakeholder community so that there is a voice for dunes. And then this is just one small piece of it. But from the south all the way up to Petoskey, you see signs in people's yards about save the dunes and protect the dunes. So access to dunes is really important, but regrettably, because they are such beautiful places, people also want to live there. And that creates some really challenging problems for the ecosystem.
And if I can jump on that, Robbie's done some great work looking at perceptions and whatnot. And in my own experience, you asked, is there one common thread that people have about dunes? And the answer, aside from we want to protect them and the kinds of things that Robbie's showing, is that it can vary widely what people think about them. In the last adjustment to the statute, had a phrase in there about preserving diversity, quality, and function of the dunes. And I think that means many different things to many different people.
I think that's right.
And for example, one will routinely see signs on beaches and whatnot that says protect our dunes. Well, what does that mean? I don't think anybody really knows what that means. I think what it really means for most people is protecting the vegetation that's on the dunes so the dunes don't move.
Right.
When in fact, a natural dune system is an active dune system. Yeah, and so you're right. There's a disconnect between that sense of things, that reality, and what people really, really want. In Europe, they've kind of gone back, especially in the UK in the last 20 years, to pulling vegetation, so dunes can be active and doing their thing. Is that what people in Michigan want? I think that's a good question. I think the real rubber meets the road is 100 years from now. The rate things are going, with the amount of shoreline structures and homes and things like that, is that one of these days it'll be a fossil dune landscape where it'll be undulating and kind of pretty here and there, but overall it's going to be pretty stable and inactive.
I really appreciate the depth and complexity of this project from its very, very early beginnings, and the new questions that are arising and the public policy challenges that they're presenting to us. As we start to learn more about the importance of letting nature do its thing, figuring out how we construct the public policy models around that to also let us as communities do our thing, it is a next big challenge. Tom, Robbie, Ellen, I just want to say thank you so much. We're at the hour here. This has been really great and informative. Out in the audience, you should know, if you posted a question in the Q&A or the chat that we didn't get to today, Bo Brockett from our staff will be working with these guys to follow up on all of those questions. And there's also some really good looking pictures on the environmentalcouncil.org website from the project a couple of years ago. And Alan, there was a question in the chat about, can people access that LiDAR imagery for the dunes?
Yeah, I did. I put a link in the chat. It's a USGS link, and it is in the chat, I think. Yeah, right. Okay, so that might have gone just to the panelists, I guess.
We'll make sure if there's a link for it, Bo will include that in the follow-up email to everyone. So.
Yeah, and you can sail around the country with that thing. It's a lot of fun. It really is.
Well, this has been excellent. I can't wait for the next steps on it. And everyone who joined us today, thanks so much. I hope you'll come back for a future Capital Connection. And in the meantime, have wonderful weekends. It's getting to be spring here in Michigan. I hope we get out and enjoy it.
Nice.
Alan, Robbie, Tom, thanks so much. Appreciate you all.
It's been fun. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.